안녕하세요. 새해 복 많이 받으세요. 저 한국 이름은 형아입니다. Hello, Happy New Year, and Happy National Korean American Day. I am tremendously honored to be here, and a very special thanks to Councilman David O. and his wonderful staff for organizing this event. You know, never in a million years did I think as a child that I would be invited to speak at a gathering like this. Never in a million years did I think I would be on television every day and reporting in a city as richly diverse and full of heart and soul as Philadelphia, the birthplace of America. So how did this happen? My story, of course, begins with my parents. My mom and dad were born and raised in Seoul, Korea, but met in the United States. My dad came here on a scholarship to get his PhD, or as he says, to access opportunity. He had to borrow money for his plane ticket to America. And once he arrived, more than a decade passed before he could afford to return to Korea to see his parents and the rest of our family once again. My mom was 5 feet tall, but fierce, quietly disruptive, and progressive. When she was 26 years old, my 할머니, my grandmother, told her to stay in Korea and get married. You know what she did? She flew to France, stayed there to get her teaching degree, and to hitchhike around Europe. Then she moved to America. Both of my parents, through their lived experiences and their words, taught me to pursue my passions and my dreams. And for that and so many other things, I owe them a debt of gratitude. My dad specifically said, figure out what you love to do, then figure out a way to make a living doing it. I was born and raised in Southern California, in a really small agricultural town called Santa Paula. My parents and I were the only Korean Americans on our block and the only Asian Americans in our entire neighborhood. But my parents instilled in me a very important truth, that to be American and to have deep, real confidence in who I am, I had to understand, appreciate, and honor the gifts of my Korean roots. It has taken over 40 years for me to fully understand that concept. But even as a child, I did embrace many elements of being Korean. And in fact, a big part of me liked being unique. I liked introducing people to new things. I taught my friends Korean words, especially dirty ones. I loved to try to gross people out, so I would invite my best friend, Nicole Caruso, over and show her all kinds of things in our pantry and our refrigerator, including melchi, which is tiny dried anchovies with big bulging eyes that we would use to make soup. I dared people to eat kimchi to see if they could handle the heat. You know, things have changed so much. When I was a child, a lot of people didn't know what Korea was or where it was. Most people would say and ask, are you Chinese or Japanese? And I would say, I'm Korean. And they would look really confused and say, what is that? Once I was on the school bus, and a fellow student asked me where I got my shoes, and I said, Korea. And she said, oh, is that new store in the Galleria Mall? I laughed at that too. But being the only often translates into being other. And that really isn't funny, right? Constantly having to explain yourself, constantly being looked at as the forever foreigner, that gets old. I mean, how tired are you of being asked, where are you from? How do you speak English so well? And I have come to realize that those questions have a deep impact. When we feel like we're not seen as American as everyone else, it hurts. It chips away at our identity. And in my case, sometimes it made me wish I was white. I pinched my nose every night when I was a kid in the hopes that it would be pointier, look more American. And I cringed when anyone learned my Korean name, Hyung-ah. As an adult, I tried not to be too Asian for much of my TV news career. which took me to stations in Idaho, Oklahoma, and Texas, where I was always the only Asian American in the newsroom. Once I was shooting an accident scene in Idaho, and a couple came up and said, "Honey, are you lost? Do you speak English?" I whispered back, "I speak English for a living, and probably better than you do." Over the span of my time in the news business, these are things I've been told. Not to speak about my personal Asian American experience because it is unbecoming of a journalist. That my work to advance diversity and inclusion is an unwelcome distraction from my other reporting. That I should be careful when talking about racism because a lot of other groups have had it a lot worse. So for more than a decade, I basically hid my Asian self in plain sight. I was on television, but not fully seen or heard. I lightened my hair. I hesitated before pitching stories about Asian American communities. Sometimes, most often, I didn't pitch them at all. I've now been in Philadelphia for almost 20 years as a news anchor and consumer investigative reporter. I am pleased to say our newsroom has become increasingly diverse. We have 2 other Asian American reporters and an Asian American photographer who just started with us. His name is Forrest Wynn. But even here in the fine city of brotherly love, and even now as an established TV journalist, I sometimes feel like other. In the parking lot of a grocery store just down the street from our station, I got out of my car and there was a group of kids in the car next to me. And they looked at me, went like this, and said, "Ching chong, ching chong." I didn't respond. You know, these kinds of things are just par for the course of the Asian American existence, right? I never wanted to make waves. I never wanted to be confrontational. So I just kept my head down and shrugged off incidents like that. But fast forward to just a few years ago, September 2017. I was crossing the street in Center City, and a driver yelled, "This is America," at me. I assumed she thought a face like mine could not belong to that of an American. And that became a pivotal moment. Because finally, after a lifetime of bottling up hurt and sealing it with a smile, I exploded on social media. In a live Facebook video, I unloaded on that driver, taking ownership of her words, "This is America." I fired back. I said, "Did you think that this face would not stand up against you, against racism and against ignorance? Well, you were wrong." I said, "I am Asian American and I am proud and I am speaking out against you today." And you know what happened? That video went viral. It sparked a movement. Tens of thousands of people commented, expressing support and showing solidarity. And there are so many examples of what can happen when we speak out. I wonder if you've seen the video posted recently by Michelle Lee. She's a Korean-American anchor in St. Louis. She said on the air that she had eaten dumpling soup on New Year's Day because that's what a lot of Korean people do. In response, Lee got a viewer voicemail complaining that she was being, quote, very Asian, and she should, quote, keep her Korean to herself. Lee posted that on social media, and the hashtag Very Asian began trending with lightning speed, people using it to share their own New Year's traditions and to turn what was meant as a derogatory comment into a point of pride. Here are a few other examples that show how action results when we stand up. A board member of a labor union posted an anti-Asian racist meme on social media. After I and a number of other Asian American journalists in Philadelphia shared that information, the post was not only taken down, the board member resigned and was replaced by an Asian American, no less. A Philadelphia hoagie shop posted a racist menu item calling mac and cheese covered in Chinese garlic sauce COVID Mac. Again, after Asian Americans pushed back, the menu item was taken down. Speaking of COVID, during the rise in anti-Asian hate, I have covered physical acts of violence perpetrated against Korean Americans, Chinese Americans, Vietnamese Americans, Thai Americans. The list is incredibly long. Most everyone is aware of the most recent incident when a Central High School student was brutally beaten on SEPTA. What not enough people also know is that this hate is not new. It is deeply rooted in our history, in stereotypes that have existed from the 1800s and continue to be perpetuated today. The first group of people excluded from entry to the U.S. based on race were Asians. Chinese women banned from entry for being, quote, lewd and immoral. Later, all Asians banned, falsely accused of taking jobs and posing a threat to our nation's health and safety. And because of this idea that we are too economically successful at the time, especially as farmers, states enacted what were called alien land laws, making it illegal for Asians to own or lease land. We need to know that history to be aware of how stereotypes lead to racist policy. We also need to shatter the model minority myth, this idea that we are all smart and hardworking and well off. The concept that we are the model minority assumes that other people of color are inferior. It pits us against Black and brown communities, making anyone who isn't Asian unfairly resent us and see us as the enemy. But we have the power to change that narrative. Look at what happens when we make noise. People come together. They move in. We create allies. Restaurant items are taken down. Board members resign. 2 states, Illinois and New Jersey, have passed laws to require that Asian American history is taught in our schools. Councilman David O. passed a resolution here in Philadelphia so that the same thing happens in Philadelphia. The White House has created 2 task forces to increase our visibility and address xenophobia against us. And from Philadelphia to the national stage, I am continuing and committed to speaking out and bringing my very Asian self to everything I do, because this is America, and I am gratified by the result. At the height of AAPI hate, 6ABC aired PSAs in support of our community, asking viewers to join us to end racism. Our station and ABC News have aired several programs to shine a light on our community. They sent one of our best storytellers here today, Matteo Iadonisi, to do a story about Korean American Day. It will air all over 6ABC. So what can you do? The call to action I am making today is to ask you to support these efforts. Let media companies, politicians, and other corporations know that these measures do not go unnoticed and, in fact, are rewarded with your vote, your money. You have the power to prove that diversity equals dollars, whether it's buying a book, supporting a candidate, watching a news program, or going to a movie. That's what we did, right, with Crazy Rich Asians and Shang-Chi. Those films were successful, which means more movies like that where we see ourselves will keep getting made. And 2 more calls to action I hope to leave you with. This is how I started. Be loud and proud. Be disruptive like my mom. Let's not let anyone tell us who we are or how we should behave. And finally, remember, to be American, you have to know what it means to be Korean. Now that I am leaning into my Koreanness, I am a happier, healthier American, better able to contribute to our country. I am tremendously grateful that my dad, my appa, who instilled that core value in me, is here today. So thank you, Daddy. He's right here in the front row. And everything I am is thanks to your wisdom and your guidance, Dad. And my father is now a defining force in my children's life, his grandchildren. He made mandu with them last weekend. They did sebe to him. And just this morning, our children joined their Korean school in singing the Star-Spangled Banner and the Korean national anthem. They're wearing hanboks. It really makes my heart soar. We are all truly proud Korean Americans. Thank you so much for having me today, and happy National Korean American Day. 감사합니다.